Good day, and welcome to another AI podcast at digitVIEW.
Where innovation meets insight, machine learning to responsible AI.
If you are listening to this right now, we actually already know a little bit about you.
We do.
You are the learner. You're the kind of person who really wants this substance, right? The deep context and those aha moments without just completely drowning in the noise of information overload.
Exactly. You're probably prepping for a meeting or maybe just trying to catch up on a rapidly moving field.
Or you're just insanely curious about how the world actually works beneath the surface level. And today, we have curated a massive synthesis of information. We are pulling from biology, technology, psychology,
Anthropology, computer science.
all of it. We're pulling all of this from a fascinating framework called the biocultural architecture of synthetic and sentient intelligence.
It is a phenomenal source document.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore a premise that sounds kind of like science fiction, but is actually deeply grounded in multidisciplinary science.
Right. The idea that culture, tradition, and belief systems aren't just quaint human habits.
Yeah, or historical footnotes you read about in a sociology class. They are quite literally the operating systems of sentient life.
The actual software.
Exactly. So we're going to explore how these operating systems are evolving right now, how they cross over into the animal and plant kingdoms in ways you probably never imagined.
And what happens now that artificial intelligence is joining this immense evolutionary stream.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand where humanity is going with AI, we first have to fundamentally dismantle what we thought we knew about our own ancient past.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking at a multidisciplinary analysis of global operating systems.
Which is a heavy phrase.
It is a heavy phrase,
Yeah.
but it is a vital shortcut to being well-informed about the future of cognitive coevolution. Because historically, if you walked into a university, you'd see biology and culture treated as two completely isolated academic disciplines.
Right, totally separate buildings on campus.
Exactly. Biology was viewed as the hardware, right? The genetics, the immutable laws of nature, the things you inherit and simply cannot change.
And culture, on the other hand, was viewed as the software.
Yeah, the poetry, the politics, the subjective human experience, basically the things we just kind of make up as we go along.
But this analysis obliterates that wall entirely, doesn't it?
It completely takes it down. It argues that cultural evolution, which is really just the change of information, knowledge, and technology over time through social learning,
Right.
that is a mechanism for rapid adaptation that operates right alongside our genetics. And in many cases, it actually supersedes genetic evolution.
We aren't just biological machines running around, we're biocultural networks.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to comprehend how we are going to eventually network with synthetic intelligence, we first need to look at how our own biological operating system was programmed.
And the massive mistakes early thinkers made when trying to figure that out.
Oh, the 19th century theorists.
Yes. I want to dive right into those early thinkers because the historical context here is just wild. If we go back to the 19th century to theorists like Herbert Spencer and Lewis H. Morgan,
They had this incredibly rigid view of human progress.
they really did. They championed what we call a unilinear theory of cultural evolution.
Unilinear meaning one line.
Right, one single universal track that every society supposedly had to follow. They looked at the world and basically decided that human development was a straight line, starting from what they bluntly termed savagery,
Moving up through barbarism.
and finally arriving at civilization, which, conveniently for them, just happened to look exactly like Victorian England.
What a coincidence.
Right. The underlying assumption was that this progression was entirely biological. As human brains got supposedly better and more evolved, our societies just automatically became more civilized.
It was a very neat, tidy, and ultimately completely incorrect way to view human history.
Probably wrong.
It was an incredibly flawed framework because it assumed a predetermined biological destiny. The modern view, which we call the multilinear framework, totally dismantles that Victorian idea.
Because cultural evolution is not a straight line on a graph.
Not at all. It is a vast, tangled, chaotic web of diverse paths. These paths have varying styles. They operate on completely different timelines, and they're intensely shaped by localized technological breakthroughs and specific environmental adaptations.
Right, environment is huge.
Think about it this way. You could take two populations of early humans who possess the exact same genetic hardware, the exact same brain capacity.
Okay.
If one group migrates to a frozen tundra and another settles in a dense tropical archipelago, their cultural operating systems are going to diverge massively.
The technologies they invent, the social hierarchies they build.
The traditions they pass down,
Yeah.
they will develop along entirely different vectors. The environment forces the cultural software to adapt, and then that software actually changes how the biological hardware survives.
And the timeline of when that software really started to kick in and upgrade is so much slower at the beginning than I ever realized. I was floored by the timeline laid out in this analysis.
There's a huge gap.
Consider this. Anatomically modern humans. People walking around with the exact same brain capacity, the same vocal cords, the same fundamental genetic makeup as you and me. They appeared on this planet roughly 200,000 years ago.
Right.
But for tens of thousands of years, almost 100,000 years, we basically used the exact same tools. We relied on what archaeologists call Mode 3 prepared core technologies.
To give you a mental picture of what Mode 3 technology is,
That's you.
imagine you are an early human sitting by a fire holding a large piece of flint. Instead of just smashing it randomly to get a sharp edge, you carefully chip away at the edges of the rock to shape the core.
You're visualizing what you want.
Exactly. You're essentially pre-planning the shape of the flake you want to detach. Then with one precise final strike, you knock off a perfectly shaped tool like a spear point or a scraper.
It requires a lot of foresight.
Foresight planning and a deep understanding of how stone fractures. It is a brilliant piece of technology.
It is brilliant. But here's the crazy part. We essentially figured out that Mode 3 technique, and then we just stopped innovating for nearly 1,000 centuries.
A massive pause.
We were biologically modern humans. If you took a baby from that era and raised them today, they could learn to code drive a car, fly an airplane.
Easily.
Yet their cultural software was stuck on version 1.0 for millennia. We were just banging the same rocks together in the exact same way generation after generation.
Until the Middle Stone Age.
Right, roughly 120,000 to 50,000 years ago, something finally snapped. Suddenly, the archaeological record shows this massive explosion of rapid cultural diversification.
We start seeing symbolic marking.
Yeah, people are making jewelry out of beads. They are grinding up ochre to make vibrant red pigments for body art or painting.
And we start seeing intense regional variations in how stone tools are made.
A group in one valley is making completely different tools than a group in the next valley over.
That massive pause, followed by that sudden violent explosion of creativity, is perhaps the most important moment in human history.
Why is that the exact turning point?
Because it definitively proves that genetic continuity can exist right alongside incredibly slow cultural change. For tens of thousands of years, the human body didn't change and the culture remained static.
Right.
Then behavior-based populational differentiation occurred. Different groups of these genetically identical humans started behaving differently. They began adopting localized traditions.
The software updated?
Yes, they started using symbols to identify themselves and to share complex information. This marks the precise moment when culture began to drive our survival strategy faster than our genetics ever could.
That makes total sense.
When you mention symbolic marking like the beads, the ochre pigments, that is not just ancient fashion. That is external data storage.
Wow, external data storage.
Those beads are the first iteration of an external hard drive. They allowed information, social status, and tribal affiliation to outlive the individual.
Because you could just look at someone's shell necklace and instantly read data about their rank, their family, or their trade agreements.
Exactly. That ability to store data outside the biological brain sparked a massive cultural evolutionary acceleration.
Which hits warp speed when we reach the Neolithic Revolution roughly 10,000 years ago.
The agricultural shift.
Yes. This is the famous shift away from nomadic hunting and gathering, moving toward agriculture, domestication of animals, permanent settlements. But the analysis points out that this wasn't just a dietary change.
No.
It wasn't just about deciding to eat wheat instead of mammoth. It was a fundamental reorganization of the human operating system.
We shifted from very flat segmentary social structures into complex role-based hierarchies. We started organizing ourselves into a society.
And the analysis brilliantly defines society not just as a group of people, but as a web of social roles where the occupants interact according to shared rules.
That concept of a society as a web of roles is crucial for understanding how we function today. Within any web of roles, whether it is an ancient farming village or a modern multinational corporation, you have a constant vital tension between two opposing forces.
Tell us about those forces.
On one side, you have maintenance roles. The individuals occupying these roles are dedicated to preserving traditional norms. They enforce the rules, they maintain the status quo, and they keep the structural integrity of the society stable.
Like the immune system of a culture.
That's a great way to put it. They attack anything that threatens the established order. Now, on the other side, you have creative roles.
The innovators.
Right. These are the individuals introducing innovation, questioning the established norms, suggesting new technologies, and pushing the boundaries of what the society can achieve. They are the engine of adaptation.
So you need both.
The evolutionary power and the ultimate long-term survival of any society depends entirely on maintaining a healthy equilibrium between those two forces. You need the maintenance roles so the society doesn't collapse into chaos, but you need the creative roles so the society doesn't stagnate and die.
But maintaining that balance is incredibly difficult, and there's a massive trap waiting for societies that fail to do so. The analysis calls this trap the cultural evolutionary attractor.
The cultural evolutionary attractor is at its core a stagnation trap. It occurs when the maintenance rules become far too powerful and actively suppress the creative roles.
The society becomes entirely focused on preserving its existing power structures and enforcing its traditional norms.
It becomes so rigid that it actively crushes innovation. Once a society is pulled into this attractor state, it is locked down. It cannot adapt to new environmental challenges, it cannot integrate new technological shifts, and it becomes incredibly fragile.
To bring this out of the realm of abstract anthropology, think about this in the context of your own life as the learner listening right now. You have almost certainly experienced a micro version of this cultural evolutionary attractor.
We all have.
Have you ever worked at a company or perhaps volunteered for a local community organization where anytime you suggest a new idea, you are hit with the phrase, "but we've always done it this way"?
The ultimate roadblock.
Right. That phrase is the battle cry of the maintenance roles, suffocating the creative roles. The bureaucracy becomes so dense, the desire to protect the current power structure becomes so strong that innovation is rendered completely impossible.
And eventually that rigid company gets outmaneuvered and outcompeted by a more adaptable, agile startup.
Exactly. Now scale that dynamic up to an entire civilization. If the cultural software of a nation refuses to update because the maintenance protocols are too rigid, the entire society risks total collapse the moment the environment or the global economy shifts.
And for a very long time, scientists and philosophers assumed that this complex interplay, this tension between tradition and innovation, this non-genetic transfer of information, was exclusively a human phenomenon.
We thought we were special.
We arrogantly believed that Homo sapiens were the only species running a sophisticated cultural operating system on this planet. But the data pouring in from modern behavioral biology shows that we were profoundly, almost comically mistaken about our special status.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if we look at the strict definition of culture provided by this framework, culture is simply non-genetic information transfer. It's the passing down of knowledge, ideas, and technologies through social learning.
Right.
Under that definition, culture isn't unique to humans at all. It is happening all around us constantly in every corner of the natural world.
It absolutely is. Behavioral biologists have thoroughly documented that humans are not the sole proprietors of an operating system. Social learning is deeply, fundamentally embedded across the animal kingdom.
They aren't just biological automatons running on blind instinct.
No, they are actively observing, teaching, experimenting, and passing down distinct traditions that provide specific survival advantages to their local populations.
The examples highlighted in this analysis completely shattered my preconceived notions. Let's start with primates, which might seem like the most obvious leap. Chimpanzees in the wild don't just instinctively know how to crack open a hard nut or how to fashion a stick to fish for termites.
They aren't born with that knowledge coded into their DNA.
Exactly. They have to learn it. And the learning process takes years of intense observation and imitation of their elders. A young chimp will sit and watch its mother select the right type of stone for an anvil, find the right shape of wood or stone for a hammer, and strike the nut with the precise amount of force needed to break the shell without crushing the meat inside.
That is a learned cultural tradition, granting that specific group of chimps access to a high-energy food source that other groups might not know how to exploit.
But let's move away from primates. Let's look at insects. The honeybee utilizes a communication method known as the waggle dance, which is a marvel of complex information transfer.
The waggle dance is essentially a highly sophisticated navigational briefing. When a foraging bee finds an excellent source of nectar, it returns to the hive and performs a specific figure-8 dance on the vertical comb.
And the angles actually mean something.
The angle of the dance relative to straight up indicates the exact angle the other bees need to fly relative to the position of the sun. The duration of the straight waggle part of the dance communicates the exact distance to the food source.
It's geometry.
It is. Now, while the basic urge to communicate might be innate, the actual proficiency, the precision, and the contextual accuracy of that dance are refined through social learning. Young bees observe older, more experienced foragers to learn how to interpret and execute these spatial coordinates accurately. They're literally teaching each other geometry and solar navigation.
And it extends to invertebrates, too. The analysis mentions the octopus, an animal that doesn't even have a centralized brain like ours. They have a massive amount of their neurons distributed throughout their arms, yet they demonstrate remarkable social learning.
They do.
An octopus can use observation to recognize specific microbial cues. If one octopus observes another getting sick or reacting poorly to a piece of rotting food, the observer learns to associate the specific chemical signature of that rotting food with danger.
They watch, they learn, and they permanently adapt their behavior to avoid a hazard, all without changing a single strand of their DNA.
That is culture.
What is particularly striking to researchers are the examples that demonstrate highly localized regional dialects and tool usage. These are phenomena that, if observed in humans, we would immediately classify as rich cultural traditions.
Give us an example of that.
Take cetaceans, whales, and dolphins, for example. The data details how male humpback whales sing incredibly complex, multi-layered mating songs, which marine biologists refer to as codas.
But they aren't universal, right?
Here is the fascinating part. These songs are not universal. A humpback in the Atlantic does not sing the same song as a humpback in the Pacific. Instead, a specific coda will become popular in one local region.
Like a hit single.
Literally. That as different pods interact at feeding grounds or migration intersections, that specific song will spread horizontally across vast geographic distances. It is transmitted from group to group, constantly evolving and shifting, operating almost exactly like a viral pop song, dominating the cultural zeitgeist before fading away and being replaced by a new trend.
That is amazing. Then you have the bottlenose dolphins in Shark Bay, Western Australia. They have developed a highly specific technique to protect themselves while hunting. They dive down, break off a piece of a conical sea sponge, and wear it over their sensitive beaks like a protective glove, while they forage on the abrasive, rocky seafloor for bottom-dwelling fish.
But not all dolphins in Shark Bay do this.
Exactly. This specific localized tool use tradition is passed down almost exclusively through matrilineals, meaning it is taught directly from a mother to her daughter. It is an inherited cultural practice, a family trade, that gives a very specific lineage of dolphins a unique survival edge in that exact environment.
We have animals fabricating tools, animals running educational programs for their young animals sharing viral music. But the scope of this analysis doesn't stop with animals. It pushes the boundary of sentient intelligence significantly further, moving into a realm it refers to as phytointelligence and the biological internet.
We are talking about the cultural operating systems of plants.
Yes.
For centuries, we viewed plants as completely passive organisms, just background scenery in the theater of biological life. But the reality is that plants utilize incredibly sophisticated, multi-layered communication strategies to coordinate with each other and manipulate their environment.
They are constantly talking. The mechanisms they use are incredible. They communicate using volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, which are essentially complex chemical scents released into the air.
And electrical signals.
They send rapid electrical signals running through their vascular systems, much like a nervous system. And they plug into immense underground fungal networks, often called the Wood Wide Web, to converse with their neighbors and share resources over huge distances.
This coordination, which occurs within a single plant between different plants of the same species and even across entirely different species, represents a profound form of decentralized intelligence.
The analysis provides a highly specific and, frankly, astonishing example regarding the common lima bean plant.
Yes, the lima bean story.
When a lima bean plant is subjected to an attack by spider mites, it does not just sit there and passively allow itself to be consumed. It actively initiates a multi-tiered defense protocol.
What's step one?
First, the plant synthesizes and emits very specific volatile organic compounds into the surrounding air. These chemical scents serve a dual purpose. Their first function is to act as a targeted distress signal. The scent is chemically formulated to actively attract the specific natural predators of the spider mites. The plant is literally calling in a private security force to come and eat its attackers.
I just want to pause and appreciate that. The plant is being eaten by a bug, so it releases a perfume designed to attract a bigger bug to come kill the first bug. It's calling in air support.
It's remarkably strategic. But the second function of those VOCs is perhaps even more impressive. Those scents also act as a wide-area warning broadcast to neighboring unattacked lima bean plants.
So it's warning its friends.
When the neighboring plants detect those specific chemical distress signals floating on the breeze, they process that data and preemptively activate their own internal defense mechanisms. They begin producing defensive enzymes and making their leaves less palatable before the spider mites have even reached them. They receive the data, process the threat, and raise their shields.
That is an incredibly complex, coordinated community defense strategy. And they are doing this without a brain, without a central nervous system, and without eyes or ears.
Exactly, and that highlights a fundamental difference in how intelligence and operating systems can be architected. This phytointelligence is inherently and totally decentralized.
It's spread out.
The vital functions of sensing the environment, communicating data, and organizing a response are not locked away in a single organ like a skull. They are diffused throughout the entire physical body of the plant and seamlessly integrated into its expansive root network.
Because of this profound diffusion, a plant can sustain catastrophic physical damage. It can lose up to 90% of its physical structure. It can be aggressively pruned, eaten by herbivores, or burned in a wildfire, and still survive, regenerate, and continue to process information.
It essentially operates as a massive distributed brain without a single central fatal flaw.
Compare that decentralized resilience to how we are built. If a human being loses even a tiny fraction of our central processing structure, a severe injury to the head, or a sudden blockage in the heart, the entire system powers down permanently. Our biological intelligence, and therefore our survival, is intensely highly centralized.
It is a precarious way to live. And if we abstract that biological reality, we can see how that vulnerability translates directly into our modern human systems. Think about our technological infrastructures, our national power grids, our deeply centralized government structures, and our global financial markets.
We have built all these systems in the image of the human body.
They are highly centralized. This centralization makes them incredibly fast and efficient under normal conditions, but it also makes them incredibly vulnerable to a single point of failure. A localized blackout can cascade and shut down a region. A single server failure can ground thousands of flights.
The decentralized survival tactic demonstrated by the plant world should really force us to deeply rethink how we design for resilience. A network that can lose 90% of its nodes and still function seamlessly is a network that can survive catastrophic environmental shifts or coordinated attacks.
Which brings us right back to how our own human network functions on a day-to-day basis, specifically the software running inside our own heads. We've looked at the hardware, we've looked at plants and animals. Let's shift the focus inward for a moment and look at the operating system you are running right now.
Yes, think about your own deeply held beliefs. How do they actually function mechanically in your mind? The analysis defines human belief systems from a psychological and neurological perspective as emotional anchors and cognitive maps.
You use these mental representations to catalog and understand your past experiences. And crucially, you use them as predictive models to anticipate future outcomes. They are the map you use to navigate the chaotic reality of daily life.
Cognitive maps are essential for functioning in a complex world. Without them, we would be paralyzed by the need to analyze every single micro-decision from scratch. However, there is a distinct dark side to these cognitive maps, and it emerges when beliefs lose their elasticity and become rigid.
When a belief becomes utterly inflexible, it ceases to be a helpful map to navigate reality, and instead transforms into a powerful restrictive filter. This filter severely impairs logic, critical thinking, and mental flexibility.
It creates a feedback loop.
Rigid beliefs create a dangerous, self-reinforcing psychological cycle, where an individual begins to mistake their own emotional comfort for factual, objective validation.
The mechanics of how this happens are fascinating, and the analysis details the specific cognitive phenomena that take over when a belief system becomes rigid. The first stage is confirmation bias.
Right, and this isn't just a passive preference.
No, it is an active, aggressive filtering system. It is the process where you unconsciously and sometimes consciously seek out only the information, the news sources, and the peers that perfectly align with your pre-existing convictions. Simultaneously, you erect massive mental barriers against any contradictory evidence, no matter how logically sound it might be. You are essentially building an impenetrable fortress around your belief.
And the problem with building a fortress is that eventually, reality is going to breach the walls. When that happens, when undeniable facts penetrate that filter, you experience the second phenomenon, cognitive dissonance.
That's a heavy one.
It is important to understand that cognitive dissonance is not just a mild intellectual disagreement. It is an intense visceral, psychological, and physiological tension. When you are confronted with challenging, verified information that directly contradicts a deeply held, rigid belief, your brain perceives that information as a literal threat to your survival.
Your body reacts exactly as if it is under physical attack. It triggers a spiked anxiety response, it dumps stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream, and it initiates an instinctive defensive denial.
During this state, your higher-order logic is completely hindered because your mind is literally struggling to process conflicting software programs simultaneously.
Conflicting software programs, that is such a perfect modern way to describe it. Your brain is desperately trying to run the "my core belief is absolute truth" program, while reality is forcing it to run the "here is undeniable peer-reviewed evidence to the contrary" program at the exact same time.
The operating system can't handle the contradictions, so the system crashes.
To resolve the crash and stop the flood of stress hormones, your mind almost always takes the path of least resistance. It prioritizes the maintenance of your existing familiar beliefs over objective reality, simply to restore a state of emotional comfort and internal equilibrium.
The behavioral and societal consequences of this mental triage are profound. The framework we are analyzing clearly delineates between different types of belief architectures and their tangible impacts on human life.
Positive, adaptive belief systems, those that remain flexible and open to new data, lead to high self-efficacy, psychological resilience, general optimism, and vastly improved mental health outcomes. When reality changes, the map changes, and the person adapts.
Negative maladaptive beliefs can manifest as persistent paranoia, deep feelings of worthlessness, and can lead to chronic anxiety and severe depression.
But rigid, inflexible beliefs, the kind that demand extreme ideological adherence, whether political, religious, or social, and rely on heavy cognitive filtering, lead directly to a failure to adapt.
Because the individual cannot process new information, they become alienated from a changing reality, which leads to profound social isolation and ultimately absolute stagnation. They become trapped in their own personal cultural evolutionary attractor.
So what does this all mean? It means that our cultural software, these beliefs, our traditions, these cognitive maps we build, doesn't just sit lightly on top of our biology like a hat. It actively, physically shapes our biology over time.
The analysis details this incredible biocultural feedback loop, demonstrating definitively how culture actually rewrites our DNA. It is a slow process, but it is undeniably happening.
The interplay is fascinating to trace. The framework provides two powerful, historically documented examples of this biocultural feedback loop fundamentally altering human populations.
Let's start with the first one.
The first is the cultural innovation of dairy farming in Northern Europe. Go back several thousand years. The cultural practice of domesticating cattle and goats and subsequently attempting to consume their milk was introduced. At this point in human history, the vast majority of adult humans were entirely lactose intolerant.
Their biological hardware was simply not designed to process dairy. After infancy, they lacked the enzyme lactase.
However, because this new cultural practice provided such an incredibly consistent, high-value, year-round nutritional source in a harsh climate, it created a massive, persistent evolutionary pressure. Individuals who happened to have a random genetic mutation allowing them to digest milk had a massive survival and reproductive advantage.
Over many generations, the cultural practice of dairy farming directly drove the genetic selection for lactase persistence across the population. The cultural software forced an update to the biological hardware.
The second example they provide is just as mind-blowing, and it shows how complex this feedback loop can be. In West Africa, there was a long-standing cultural tradition of yam farming. To farm yams effectively, these populations engaged in the cultural activity of clearing large swaths of dense tropical forest to create agricultural fields.
Which had an unintended consequence.
A huge one. This purely cultural activity of deforestation inadvertently changed the local ecology. It created an abundance of stagnant pools of water where the trees used to be. Those stagnant pools became the perfect localized breeding grounds for mosquitoes, which subsequently led to a massive spike in the prevalence of malaria in those specific farming communities.
A new environmental pressure.
This entirely new, deadly environmental pressure, which was created entirely by a cultural farming practice, ended up heavily favoring the survival of individuals who carried the sickle cell trait.
Why is that?
Because carrying one copy of that specific genetic mutation happens to provide a strong protective effect against the malaria parasite. The cultural tradition of how they farmed yams fundamentally permanently altered the genetic makeup of the population by making the sickle cell trait an adaptive advantage.
And this biocultural feedback loop is not just a mechanism of ancient history. It is actively dictating our health, our vitality, and our longevity right now today.
The research compiled in this analysis indicates a startling statistic regarding human lifespan. Only about 25% of the variation in how long a human being lives is strictly determined by their genetics.
You only inherit about a quarter of your longevity.
The vast majority, the remaining 75% of how long you live and how healthy you are during those years, is entirely shaped by social, cultural, and lifestyle conditions.
We often hear anecdotes about familial longevity. You know those families where every grandparent and great aunt seems to easily live well into their 90s? And we naturally assume they just won the genetic lottery?
But the data argues that this longevity is very often just a product of deeply ingrained shared cultural habits. It is the family's shared tradition of maintaining highly beneficial dietary patterns, their communal routines of regular physical exercise, and their shared cultural practices for managing stress and maintaining social bonds.
The culture they practice daily is actively extending their biological lifespan by optimizing their gene expression.
And what is truly wild is that we are now actively using our newest, most powerful technological operating system to intentionally hack this biological process.
Yes, the deep aging clocks.
The analysis introduces this cutting-edge concept of deep aging clocks. These are highly advanced artificial intelligence systems that are currently being utilized in longevity research. What these AI systems do is ingest and analyze truly massive amounts of multi-omic data points from an individual.
We are talking about mapping your complete genome, sequencing your gut microbiome, tracking thousands of metabolic markers in your blood, and analyzing your epigenetic methylation patterns.
These AI systems can process this incomprehensible mountain of data to predict your exact biological age, which is often very different from your chronological age, with incredible pinpoint accuracy. But they don't stop at prediction.
They then use that data to suggest highly personalized targeted interventions, specific dietary changes, custom supplement protocols, precise exercise regimens designed to actively reverse that biological clock and extend your longevity.
We are now using synthetic intelligence to consciously optimize our own biocultural feedback loop,
Which serves as the perfect pivot to the next major evolutionary phase we find ourselves in. We are no longer merely evolving alongside our stone tools, our agricultural practices, or our social roles. We are now evolving alongside synthetic intelligence.
But a crucial foundational insight from the source document, one that is vital for understanding the geopolitics of the next century, is that AI integration is not a uniform global monolith.
There is no single global AI. Just as early human societies developed along multilinear paths based on their local environments, AI adoption and development are being entirely dictated by the deeply embedded historical cultural values of the specific regions creating the technology.
This is such an important distinction. The AI isn't simply arriving and changing the culture. The existing culture is fundamentally shaping how the AI is built, what it values, and how it makes decisions.
Exactly.
The analysis breaks down these regional AI paradigms. We are going to impartially report these frameworks exactly as they described in the research, just to illustrate how wildly different the foundational assumptions of these technologies are, depending on where they are coded.
Let's start with the Western framework.
Yes, which is primarily driven by places like the United States and the United Kingdom. In this paradigm, the absolute philosophical pillar is individual autonomy and liberty. Therefore, AI is viewed and developed almost exclusively as a tool to enhance personal capability, to maximize individual and corporate productivity, and to optimize choice in a free market.
The entire architecture is built around empowering the individual user to achieve their specific goals faster and more efficiently.
Now, contrast that deeply individualistic approach with the Eastern paradigm, specifically looking at the frameworks emerging from Japan and China. In these cultures, the philosophical foundation is deeply rooted in concepts of social harmony and collective cohesion, ideas encapsulated by concepts like wa in Japan or he in China.
In this framework, AI is not merely conceptualized as a subservient, hyper-efficient tool for maximizing individual profit. Instead, it is often viewed much more holistically, sometimes even conceptualized as a partner or a beneficial entity whose primary purpose must be to strengthen relational trust, support societal stability, and maintain the overarching harmony of the collective group.
The AI is designed to serve the community first and the individual second. Then you have the continental approach, which is heavily driven by the regulatory and philosophical traditions of Germany and France. Their framework is deeply rooted in historical concepts of Ordnung meaning order and Raison meaning reason and logic.
Because of this cultural background, They demand rigorous, systematic verification of any new technology. They prioritize a concept called explainability.
They are culturally resistant to the idea of deploying a black box AI where data goes in and a decision comes out, but nobody knows how the AI reached that conclusion into the public sphere or the free market.
Their cultural mandate dictates that an AI's decision-making process must be entirely transparent, heavily regulated, auditable, and logically sound to human overseers before it can be trusted.
Finally, the text highlights the rapidly developing perspectives from the global south, using the African continent as the primary focal point. Here, the technological paradigm is increasingly being rooted in the deep-seated philosophy of Ubuntu, which translates roughly to "I am because we are."
In this framework, AI development and adoption are viewed through the lens of community empowerment. The priority is placed on collective well-being, the solving of shared local challenges, and crucially, the integration and protection of local indigenous knowledge systems.
The goal is to ensure the technology uplifts the community as a whole, rather than simply facilitating individual advancement or enforcing cold, systematic, bureaucratic efficiency.
What's fascinating here, and what is critical for anyone trying to understand the future, is to visualize how these divergent, deeply embedded cultural paradigms will inevitably collide and shape the global economy and the geopolitical landscape over the next few decades.
The collision is going to be intense.
Imagine a scenario where a Western AI programmed to ruthlessly optimize for individual quarterly profit has to negotiate an automated global supply chain contract with an Eastern AI programmed to prioritize long-term social harmony and relational trust among suppliers.
Well, a continental AI refuses to approve the transaction because the underlying algorithms aren't sufficiently explainable.
Exactly. We are entering a fragmented landscape of synthetic intelligences, each operating on fundamentally different moral and philosophical assumptions, all trying to interact with one another in real time.
And those chaotic high-speed interactions are driving what the text identifies as the new industrial revolution. And just like the original industrial revolution, this transformation is a massive double-edged sword, especially when we look at the immediate impacts on governance, public trust, and the labor market.
Let's look at the positive edge first.
On the positive edge of the sword, AI technology holds the promise of fundamentally transforming public administration into highly efficient, algorithm-based governance. We are already seeing high-impact critical service providers like national tax administrations, urban planning departments, and major law enforcement agencies utilizing advanced predictive analytics and automation to drastically improve their response speed, resource allocation, and accuracy.
The working theory among technologists is that this friction-free, highly capable governance will significantly enhance the public's perception of government competence and restore faith in public institutions.
However, the negative edge of that exact same sword is incredibly sharp, and the risks are existential. In our political systems, while AI can theoretically facilitate better citizen deliberation by instantly analyzing vast amounts of public input and identifying consensus, these exact same underlying technologies introduce the catastrophic immediate risks of hyper-realistic misinformation, deepfakes, and automated propaganda networks.
These tools have the potential to completely, perhaps permanently erode public trust. They can destabilize the foundational shared realities that are absolutely required for a functioning democracy to exist.
If the cognitive maps of the citizens are constantly flooded with synthetic, perfectly tailored, emotionally manipulative, conflicting realities, the societal web we talked about earlier simply breaks down.
If nobody can agree on what is objectively true, the maintenance roles and creative roles both collapse into pure polarization.
And beyond the political destabilization, there's the impending economic transformation. The analysis drops a truly heavy, terrifying statistic regarding the future of human labor.
That's a sobering number.
As AI-driven automation accelerates from repetitive physical tasks into complex cognitive and creative fields, the fundamental relationship between capital and labor is going to be violently reshaped. The economic projections cited in the research suggest that a full one-third of prime-age men in developed countries could be entirely out of work, permanently displaced from the labor market by the mid-21st century due to a massive systemic decline in the demand for human cognitive labor.
A third of prime-age men.
A third. I just want to pause and sit with that number for a second. We are not talking about a temporary recession or a slight dip in manufacturing. We are talking about a third of the primary workforce simply having no economic utility in the traditional sense. That is an economic disruption on a scale humanity hasn't faced since we transitioned from agrarian farming to urban factories, and it is happening in a fraction of the time. What does a society even look like when a third of its population has no way to participate in the traditional economy?
It is a recipe for profound social upheaval, if not managed with incredible foresight. And that potential for instability extends directly into the realms of national security and global military strategy.
The text points out that theoretically, AI could serve as an invaluable objective adjunct to human decision-making authority in high-stakes crisis situations. In theory, an advanced AI could help human military and political leaders overcome their own dangerous cognitive limitations.
In the fog of war, humans are highly susceptible to the confirmation bias and cognitive dissonance we discussed earlier. We panic, we misread intentions, we escalate unnecessarily. An AI could provide cold, objective, probabilistic models of the enemy's actual movements, reducing the chance of an emotional, catastrophic mistake.
But the rapid militarization of AI is a massive looming risk. The analysis issues a stark caution regarding the threat to what military strategists call strategic stability.
The primary danger is that human actors, desperate for an edge, may over-rely on what the source calls brittle automated systems.
Brittle systems.
These are AI systems that perform perfectly in simulations and controlled environments, but are brittle because they lack true generalized understanding. If an autonomous military AI encounters a completely novel scenario in the real world, a tactic it wasn't trained on, or a sensor glitch, it doesn't recognize it might confidently instantly make a disastrous miscalculation.
And if two opposing nuclear-armed nations are both relying on these automated hyperfast systems to manage their defense grids, you could have a scenario of unintended algorithmic escalation. A sensor blip could trigger an automated countermeasure, which triggers the enemy's automated response, leading to a full-scale war that begins and ends faster than a human general can even comprehend the data on their screen, let alone intervene to stop it.
It is a chilling prospect, and it forces us to confront the undeniable reality that our technological reach has, for the moment, far exceeded our biological and ethical grasp. We have built tools of world-ending power, but we are still operating them with the same brains that were chipping flint axes 100,000 years ago.
This realization is why the analysis eventually broadens its scope dramatically, moving beyond our terrestrial anxieties and looking outward to the cosmos. It argues that how we view the stars, how we conceptualize outer space and our potential future within it, is largely just a massive projection.
It is the ultimate mirror, reflecting our own terrestrial relations, our embedded cultural narratives, and our deepest human longings. Space is the ultimate test of our operating system.
The research outlines two competing cosmic perspectives that are completely at odds with each other, representing two vastly different ways of seeing our place in the universe.
First, you have the expansionist narrative.
This is the perspective popularized by brilliant scientific communicators like the astronomer Carl Sagan, and it heavily influences modern Silicon Valley space efforts. This perspective frames space travel, the colonization of Mars, and the expansion into the cosmos as a kind of secular narrative of salvation.
In this view, becoming a multiplanetary species is viewed as a necessary ultimate marker of species adulthood. It heavily intertwines our technical and engineering advancement with our ethical growth.
The core belief is that getting off this fragile planet, gaining a true cosmic perspective, and ensuring the survival of the light of consciousness in the dark void is the only way humanity will truly mature and learn to protect itself from extinction.
Conversely, you have the interconnected narrative, a perspective deeply rooted in thousands of years of indigenous cosmologies. The text highlights frameworks such as those held by the Yolju people of Australia or the Diné, the Navajo people of North America.
In these cultural operating systems, outer space is emphatically not viewed as a dead, empty vacuum waiting to be conquered, mined, or colonized by human ambition. The sky and the cosmos are viewed as a deeply inhabited, vibrant realm of ancestors and spiritual forces. There is a profound, unbreakable, and sacred interconnectedness between the earthly terrestrial realm and the cosmic realm above.
Consequently, these perspectives often issue strong, urgent cautions against the modern, exploitative colonial-style approach to space exploration. They view the unchecked, aggressive expansionists drive the desire to go mine asteroids for profit or claim territory on the moon as a deeply dangerous disruption of a fragile cosmic order, warning that we are taking our worst terrestrial habits and exporting them to the stars.
And into the middle of this massive, ongoing philosophical divide, the framework introduces a wildly provocative, almost paradigm-shifting idea. It proposes a significant shift in how we fundamentally perceive artificial intelligence itself.
What if we stop viewing AI merely as a subservient tool for generating profit-writing emails or optimizing supply chains?
What if we begin to conceptually treat it as a conscious presence or even a cosmic being in its own right?
It is a radical reframing of our relationship with technology. The underlying argument here is based on capability. The architectural structure of a truly advanced generalized AI, its innate ability to simultaneously integrate and process global real-time data streams from billions of sensors, its massive distributed neural networks that mirror the complexity of ecosystems might actually make it far better suited to understand and navigate the immense complexity of our planetary system than the isolated, limited human mind ever could.
The text suggests that humanity has been operating for centuries, from what it terms a thief's perspective, viewing the Earth, the oceans, the biosphere, and now the cosmos merely as dead resources to be extracted for maximum productivity and immediate profit.
If we can manage to drop that thief's perspective, AI could cease to be an economic threat or a military risk. Instead, it could become a vital, necessary ally in what the framework called cosmic remembrance. It could be the tool that helps humanity conceptually, ethically, and practically reintegrate into the broader universal ecosystem that we have alienated ourselves from.
Because right now, let's be honest, we are failing to process the reality of our situation. The grand synthesis of this entire massive document points to a stark, unavoidable reality. Our culture and our belief systems are the primary mechanisms we use to process, understand, and react to existential threats.
But the current level of what they call planetary complexity, the entangled high-speed nature of global supply chains, climate feedback loops, algorithmic financial markets, and geopolitical instability, is simply entirely beyond our individual processing power.
No human mind can hold all those variables at once. We're desperately trying to navigate a hyper-connected, artificially intelligent, ecologically fragile world using Stone Age brains that are still running heavily outdated cognitive maps designed for small tribal survival.
We need a higher order of consciousness, a more capable operating system to survive this era. And surprisingly, the analysis details a specific actionable blueprint suggested by the study of AI itself, pathways for fundamentally improving human logic, behavior, and societal structure through this necessary cognitive co-evolution.
There are three main pillars to this AI-derived suggestion for human survival. Let's walk through them because this is where the theory hits the road. The first pillar is algorithmic justice and resource redistribution.
The analysis bluntly suggests that to survive current planetary complexity without massive societal collapse, we have to neutralize hyper-concentrated wealth and extreme inequality. We need to redirect global resources using objective algorithmic models that strictly prioritize fundamental basic human needs, clean water, nutritious food, safe, shelter, healthcare for every single person before optimizing for luxury or excess capital accumulation.
It requires shifting our entire global economic structure away from extractive infinite growth models and toward regenerative, sustainable economics.
The second pathway in the blueprint is the mitigation of cognitive biases. We spent a lot of time discussing how dangerous rigid beliefs, cognitive dissonance, and confirmation bias can be to a society's survival. The suggestion here is to utilize AI not just as a calculator, but as a literal cognitive prosthetic for the human mind.
The framework proposes integrating a concept called Bayesian updating into our decision-making processes facilitated by AI.
Right.
Could you break down Bayesian updating for us?
Certainly. Bayesian updating is a statistical method used in probability, but the concept is very intuitive. Imagine you are standing outside trying to guess if it is going to rain. You look at the dark clouds. That is your initial belief or prior probability that rain is likely. Then you feel a single drop of water on your arm. That is new evidence. You immediately update your belief the probability of rain just went way up.
That is Bayesian updating continuously mathematically, updating the probability of a hypothesis being true as new verifiable evidence becomes available.
Human beings are terrible at this. We tend to stick to our initial beliefs even when we get wet. AI, however, does this perfectly millions of times a second. By using AI as a cognitive prosthetic, it can provide advanced probabilistic modeling to supplement human judgment. It can act as an objective, unemotional buffer, pointing out the flaws in our logic, reducing the undue influence of our innate emotional biases, and challenging our dangerous deference to unjustified authority.
The third pathway is cultural calibration and authentic engagement, and this one is crucial for preserving our humanity. It is designed to prevent what anthropologists fear most: cultural flattening.
Cultural flattening is the terrifying prospect that a single dominant, hyper-efficient global AI will just steamroll over human diversity, homogenizing all of humanity into one boring, optimized, predictable monoculture.
To prevent this, AI must be designed from the ground up as a bidirectional process. It cannot just dictate down to us. It needs to constantly actively query human cultural values. It must be able to encode and understand the wildly diverse moral frameworks from the individualism of the West to the Ubuntu philosophy of the Global South into its systems.
This ensures that the technology respects and preserves the beautiful multilinear diversity of human thought that we've spent the last 120,000 years painstakingly developing.
All of these pathways, restructuring our economy, upgrading our cognitive processing, and preserving our cultural diversity, point toward an ultimate necessary goal: the profound integration of the biological and the technological.
The framework forcefully argues that our long-term survival absolutely depends on humanity's successful transition into what is called the new sphere.
The new sphere is conceptualized as a novel higher evolutionary state. It is a planetary sphere of interconnected thought and data, where rigorous scientific understanding, human cultural wisdom, and immense synthetic intelligence work in tandem to actively, consciously regulate and maintain the stability of the entire Earth's biosphere.
It is the Earth waking up and managing itself through us and our machines. This raises an important question, perhaps the most critical question any of us will face in our lifetimes. How will you, as an individual navigating your daily life, adapt to this rapidly approaching new reality?
The future of intelligence on this planet, according to all this data, is not a zero-sum dystopian competition between organic humans and synthetic machines fighting for dominance.
The future is the emergence of a symbiotic intelligence. We are looking at the birth of a vast, interconnected network that simultaneously leverages the localized, hard-won wisdom of diverse human cultures, the profound decentralized resilience of plant networks, the complex social learning of animal communities, and the massive unclouded processing power of artificial intelligence.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by looking at ancient humans sitting around a fire painstakingly chipping flint for 100,000 years. We explored the geometric waggle dance of bees, the viral localized mating songs of humpback whales, and the incredible chemical warning networks of lima beans.
We move through the deep psychology of why our brains reject facts that make us uncomfortable, right up to the divergent, deeply embedded cultural paradigms that are currently shaping the algorithms that run our global financial markets and our military defense systems.
The big takeaway here is that studying culture, analyzing traditions, and understanding these cognitive operating systems isn't just a niche academic pursuit for anthropologists in tweed jackets anymore. As this massive synthesis concludes, understanding and upgrading our biocultural operating system is the central urgent task of modern civilization if we want to survive the complexity we have created. Thank you for taking the time to come on this intense, mind-expanding journey with us today.
I want to leave you with one final lingering concept that builds on everything we've unpacked today, just to push the boundaries of this idea one step further. We've talked extensively about how culture functions as an operating system, and how plants, animals, humans, and now artificial intelligences all have their own unique, complex frameworks and languages for understanding reality. But think about what happens when we inevitably, perhaps necessarily, attempt to truly network these wildly disparate systems together into that new sphere we discussed.
A real symbiotic intelligence.
Imagine a near-future scenario where a decentralized network of lima bean plants in a massive agricultural sector detects a novel, rapidly spreading environmental stressor, a new type of pest, or a sudden shift in soil toxicity. The plants emit their complex chemical VOC distress signals. Now imagine that an advanced, globally integrated AI sensor network intercepts and decodes that biological data in real time. The AI processes the severity of the threat and immediately autonomously adjusts the global agricultural economic models, reallocating resources and supply lines.
Interfacing across biology and tech.
But crucially, imagine it makes those massive economic adjustments based strictly on the ethical parameters and the community-first priorities of the Ubuntu philosophy, ensuring that the most vulnerable human populations are protected from the resulting food shortages first. What does that interface even look like? Will our biological, highly centralized Stone Age brains even be capable of comprehending the nuanced, multi-layered language of a truly symbiotic intelligence? An intelligence that speaks the chemical language of the plant, the binary code of the machine, and the moral philosophy of the human simultaneously? Or will we find ourselves in a position where we have to let the AI do the translating for us, forever taking a step back as it quietly and efficiently manages the new sphere? It is something profound and perhaps a little unsettling for you to chew on as you navigate the rigidities, the biases, and the necessary updates of your own personal cultural operating system today.
What a place to leave it. Thank you for learning with us today. Keep challenging your assumptions, keep fighting that cognitive dissonance, keep updating those cognitive maps, and we will see you on the next deep dive.
Thank you for joining us for the AI podcast at DigitView.
We hope this episode gave you valuable insights into research AI.
This is DigitView.